Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father, as we now worship you, we now prepare to meditate upon your holy words. And we simply pray that you will fill every one of us with your Spirit. It is not through our ability, our talents, our knowledge, but we completely surrender ourselves to you so that you will speak in our hearts and enable us to understand the depth of the truth that's embedded in your scriptures. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Amen. A few minutes back, we sang a song, "We are a moment, you are forever, Lord of the ages, God before me. We are the vapor, you are eternal, love everlasting, reigning on high." I wish to thank the worship team for leading us through this worship in a very wonderful way. And I wonder whether those who selected the songs had an intuition of what I was going to preach. They almost emptied what I wanted to say. The theme that is before us today is remembrance as an act of Christian witness. Rajan reminded us of 1983 riots, but this theme struck my mind for a totally another reason. I attended a Thanksgiving service of a member who had passed away in this church a few weeks back. Before the service, there was a discussion. How do you call this service? A memorial service, a Thanksgiving service, a remembrance service, and so on. And soon after the service, because it was a memorial service, I think his friends, his relatives all were here. One middle-aged couple walked to me and said, "Reverend, do you remember me?" And this always happens to pastors like us. You meet so many people, and after some years, you don't know who they are. So I was blinking but pretending to know him. He knew my struggles, and then he began to give me a clue. He said, "You married me, you were at our engagement, now can you think who we are?" I just couldn't. And then he went on to even remember the text on which I preached at their wedding. And that gave me some kind of consolation that at least someone who listens to the sermon at a wedding and remembers the text. But it was quite an embarrassing moment for me. And then I was wondering what memories are, what's all about remembrance. It's not about my age and because I have now retired. But I just started to look into the biblical aspect. And I suddenly discovered the wonders that are embedded in the scriptures under the theme of remembrance. Of course, the word remembrance and memories very often overlap, cross each other's, it's interchangeable. Memories are what sticks in our mind for sentimental reasons, for emotional reasons. Sometimes we are overwhelmed by what we experience and it makes a deeper impact. And memories can be happy ones, it also can be sad ones. But it strikes our heart at a special moment. And memories, I believe, are very often, not always, subjective, and it's rooted in individual experience. And it is also a momentary experience which can fade away, can be rekindled after some time. But in the biblical concept, the word remembrance is used with a particular emphasis. It's intentional, it is purposeful, and it makes a point how you sustain your memories and how do you transfer it to a realm of remembrance. All over the world, we talk about the Remembrance Day, where we remember the soldiers who sacrificed their lives during the World War. We may not have lived through that particular phase, but you remember. You remember with a particular purpose. You remember with thanksgiving. You remember the sacrifices they did. And it's very often the word remembrance becomes a collective act. It goes into your past and it tries to make a sense of the present so that we can leap into the future. We have had striking events like the tsunami. People have memories of it. But there are few people who would remember tsunami with a particular intention for a particular purpose. And very often, we have many events, including what Rajan was mentioning about the 93 riots. The question comes to our mind, do you have memories of the 1983 riots, or do you remember 1983 riots? Now, memories, the same riots can have different memories to different people. I would now say I was fortunate to be a victim in 1983 riots, giving me an experience of what it is to be in a burning building for 2 hours with no signs of rescue, and then being a refugee in a Hindu temple for about 4 to 5 days. And the first visitor who visited me in that camp was a beggar named Hanifa, who lived in the streets of Dam Street. And when he found the City Mission building burnt, he decided to search for me. Different kinds of impact, different kinds of experience. I have different kinds of memories. But if you're talking about remembering 1983, then we have to go back into the Bible to understand some of the fundamentals. I know these two words are very confusing because it can be interchanged. And if you start reflecting in your own language of Tamil or Sinhala, it's much more confusing because you don't have distinctive vocabulary. I hope in Sinhala it's called Matakaya and Matakirima. And in Tamil, Ninevugal, Ninevukural. So it's almost the same word played in. And soon after death, we do have, in a sense, a memorial service. People are full of memories, so you listen to the tributes, various memories are shared. But after a few years, the church forgets them, the neighbors forgets them. Maybe the members of the family just make a remembrance out of them. Because for them, it was not just a memory of a moment, but it was a lifetime experience. As Christians, I believe the tragedy is that we often fail to remember why we should remember. We have lost that art, the biblical basis of remembrance. And I believe Adam and Eve failed to remember the restrictions that God made, and that led into a rather chaotic situation for all of us through the history. And there is also the story, or people just say it for fun, that the oldest computer can be traced to Adam and Eve, and the brand was Apple, and the memory was just 1 byte, and everything crashed. So the very words of memories and remembrance are now also in the technological field. God knew that his people forget. They may hold on to some memories of some enriching experience, some sad, some good, but he knew that people forget. And there was this particular incident in Egypt about which we read in the Bible. So I believe God initiates a transformation of the memories into a day of remembrance. Memories is what we experience, how we see, how we perceive. And in the process of encountering God, we find that it is transformed into a remembrance where the focus is God. So verse 14, it says, "This day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival." Don't think about the operation. It's a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations, you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. If you read that verse 14, there are 5 emphases that are given. And I believe the transformation takes place from our memories into a remembrance. So God gives a command for a collective remembrance. What God has done, how I brought you out of Egypt. And that becomes the Jewish Passover. And you find in the Bible that the people of Israel have many such events of remembrance. They recollected their encounter and the experience of God, not just as a Passover, but if you read the first few chapters in Exodus, God is also telling them who He is. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And again, during the David's king, we find their remembrance is shifted to the temple, the Zion, that if you read Psalm 137, even if you don't know it, you will remember the famous song of Bonnie M. by the rivers of Babylon. And when the captors ask them to sing the songs of Zion, they say, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? But in verse 5, they say, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember Jerusalem above my highest joy. That was the way the Jewish people observed what is called a remembrance. Even Jeremiah, though he spoke about a covenant in the heart, not about external rituals, and he's talking about the restoration and exhortation to repent. In Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 21, he says, set up road markers for yourself. Make yourself signposts. Consider the highway, the road by which you went, so that you will not forget what the God has done for you. So remembrance became part and parcel of the Jewish life. And if you read Psalms, you will find that most of the Psalms are remembering the mighty acts of God. And it's also not only reminding the people of Israel, sometimes the people of Israel remind God also. Lord, remember David, what he had done to you. Do not make him suffer like this. Lord, remember the people who are oppressed. Are you asleep? So the remembrance becomes a dual exchange where you can also remind God in case you think he had forgotten you. And having understood remembrance as a transformation of memories, what does it imply for our Christian witness today? The first is that it brings about an intergenerational transmission of faith. When you have come to the land that the Lord will give you, as He has promised, you shall keep this observance. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this observance? You shall say what God did in Egypt. It's a celebration, it's a festival, it's a remembrance, but with a tremendous responsibility of the head of the household to transmit the faith to the next generation. I like it really. If your children forget God, don't blame your minister. If your children forget God, don't blame your Sunday school teacher. It is the head of the household who had forgotten to transmit the faith and to remember what God has done. And I believe this handing the faith to the next generation is an essential act of the remembrance that we are called to hold. Every family becomes a temple of God. Every family becomes where you interact, share what God has done. And I believe the tradition of family prayers and exchange of ideas between a family began from this root. And this you can still see in Jewish families. And therefore today, we need to ask the question, we who are grown up or growing up, how have we witnessed in transferring our faith to the next generation? Do we have experienced that God in such a way that we can tell the children, when you ask, why are you going to the church on Christmas Day? Why are you celebrating Good Friday? Why are you having big Easter Sunday? Why are you celebrating the anniversaries of the church? Can we tell them what God did in Egypt, the Egypts in our life? And therefore, the first challenge is to ask today, if we are Christians who have transformed our memories into act of remembrance, are we able to share the faith with our children to the next generation? Secondly, when you look at the whole context in Egypt, we also affirm that our God is a God of history. It's the deliverance that God brings to us, and the commandment to observe it as a remembrance is in an historical context. It is not just a myth or a theory or a fancy philosophy that we are asked to hold. How we were and what God did. This goes beyond the Passover, even before the Passover is instituted. God reminds Moses, Exodus chapter 6, verse 3, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. And therefore you had this nomadic creed of Israel, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And therefore it's a time when we remember, we know that our God has acted throughout the history. It is not just a moment in which He became active. From the time we can remember our forefathers, even up to today, the God acts. And therefore there is another challenge. It's not just an invented faith, it's a historical faith that continues to flow through history, where God acts in history. What will be our creed? Yes, we may affirm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Can we extend that? Can we say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Thomas Cook, the God of John Wesley, the God of George Good, or others whom we can remember in the past few decades? And then can we conclude by including our own family surnames to it, our own father's name to it? It's a creedal formula that has not ended with Jacob. It goes with dots to be filled. And therefore, we need to ask, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is He not the same God who was the God of our parents, our forefathers, our God, so that our children can say, that God whom I worship was the God of my parents. The God of Bandaya or Kandaya, the God of Fernando or Sundaram Pillai. Where can we bring our own names into that creedal formula? Because we believe in a God of history who connects to the history of God, and that's a dimension of another witness. And in this same story of Exodus, we also see that remembrance that leads to the worship of our God. Chapter 12, 27 says, and the people bowed down and worshiped. And in this whole episode of the Exodus story, whenever God interferes and intercedes for the people of Israel, He said to Pharaoh, let them go free so that they may worship me. Our remembrance should lead us to that act of worship. Our deliverance from social bondage to the slavery should enable us to have authentic worship as free people in God. Our deliverance, our remembrance should enrich our relational encounter with God. God's deeds through the generations we recollect, and then we sing songs of praises, adoration, and worship. And remembrance becomes, in fact, the key to worship and also a powerful means of worship. So it's no longer that the Christian worship is a worship in solitude. You individually pray, which is important. But worship becomes a collective act because we collectively remember the God who worked in history, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who transformed. Of course, in the New Testament, in our church today, we have transformed, as Jesus wanted us, the Passover event to the Eucharist. But again, let us remember that God did not say, have a memory for me, have a memorial event for me. He said, remember what God has done. Every time we come into the Lord's table is a remembrance of what the powerful acts of witness. And that table defines who our God is, who we are and whose we are, and how we are and how we live. Everything is decided in that act of remembrance, because when we were unworthy, God yet loved us. He not only loved and cared for us, but He loved us so much that He sacrificed Himself so that you and I can worship God today. So my friends, remembrance is an act of transformation of memories. And so even if you look at 1983, we need to ask as Christians, are we still living in an era of memories, or have we transformed into an act of remembrance? Yes, we suffered, but God lifted us up. Yes, we ran. Yes, people were killed, but God brought a sense of transformation, a care. And that is my life's testimony. Having gone through that whole negative experience in 1983, through the help of senior leaders in the church, I was able to grasp a little bit of the transformation, so that since then, in my ministry, my great comrades were some Buddhist monks who led the riots. My great friends were people in the army who are now major generals and brigadiers and so on. A complete transformation. The people whom you would have labeled as enemies have been transformed to be seen as your friends, your companions, the people who support you in your work. The memories have been transformed. And that is the essence of Christianity. We go through crisis, we go through tremendous suffering, we go through oppression, and when we experience God, we turn those memories into an act of remembrance, because God did this on that day to us. And the God of transformation transforms our memories, because our focus shifts from us to God. And then even the most negative experience in life becomes events when we proclaim the goodness of God. I remember the chorus that was sung during my Wesley College days, over and over like a mighty sea, comes the love of Jesus rolling over me. Probably this is an adapted chorus from a song, a Salvation Army song. But when you say over and over like a mighty rolling over me, that means it doesn't start from me, it doesn't end with me. It comes, it flows, like the waves in the ocean. And then we sing about the goodness of God. All my days I have been held in your hands. It's not just a moment, it's a history. Every day is in God's hand. transforming our memories into remembrance, act of remembrance, so that you see God, what He did in Egypt, not what Pharaoh did, not what your memories can bring to you. And then you sing, the goodness is running after me. And therefore, there is a poet by the name Brian Wren. In his own poetical words, he talks about the transformation that brings in the Old Testament, taking us back to the times of Israelites, not when they were a glorious state during David's time, a big powerful kingdom or a massive country, but going back to the nomad's life. He says, but nomads in a desert land, and they became the dawn of hope for humankind, was glimpsed by them alone of the future unknown. Memories are made of a moment, but when you remember what God does, you get connected to that historical context, where God did to our forefathers, what God did to us becomes the hope for tomorrow. And he also says, through this, they never changed their gods, neither did they change their gods. They praised, they remembered, handed on, so that the past can be remembered, so that we may look at the future with the promise and the hope that God has given us. Let us, in that spirit, reflect where we are in each moment. Even in 1983, are we living with memories of our own experiential memories? Or have we experienced a transformation, remembering that event where God, what He did in 1983,